Yeah, this is Scotty's castle. World famous, of course. We have an inside tour coming up in a few minutes. There you go. Yeah, it's definitely breezy in Grapevine Canyon this morning. Yeah, it looks like it's almost 9:30 up there, according to the sundial. And the staircase going up.
Yeah, there we go. So, you can sit on the bench right there. Yep. So the main things are, for over 70 years, we've had folks passing through here. Some days it's just a couple dozen, some days it's a few hundred. So to protect our household, we do have our set of rules, and they are conveniently printed on the back of your tickets if you want to take a look at it as we go through here. Now, the main things happen to do with what we are doing when we go inside the household. Things, food or drink, if you brought it up this far, you have found a perfect place for them right in that bench there, and it will be conveniently chilled when you come back out, so it'll be pretty nice that way. Anything else, no mints or gum. If you're chewing it right now, we have a beautiful trash can right there to spit things out of before we enter into the household here. Right across from the master suite, so you can look outside and see it. All right, well, once again, welcome to Scotty's Castle. Now, Scotty's Castle here tells the story that really shaped its growth and development as well. And so Scotty's Castle, of course, talks about Death Valley Scotty. An interesting character. So you can see the type of cars that Johnsons like to travel in. This is a couple wealthy enough that if they wanted to buy a Packard one year, they'd just give their old one away. It was only a year old, so it worked pretty well. And they just travel out here. And they love Death Valley, and as we go through the household, we'll see a bit more about what drew them out to this area. Now, a very specific reason for the fact that our castle is situated right here, 1 mile up that canyon, is water. And water, of course, is that life-giving resource out here in the desert and makes it very comfortable for the family who chose to live here. But in the very early years, the Johnsons did not plan to build a castle. This was not the intent. They didn't barely even have paper plans when they started building. When the Johnsons were out here in the early teens, they were camping. They had canvas tents. They slept close to the ground. They cooked rough. And that was what life was like out here. Well, it's basically this 2-story building across here. But the thing is, when Albert built that original structure, what you want to see is strip everything off of it that is decorative and attractive. He built her a very plain, very practical 2-story structure, the Death Valley Ranch. And other rich folk of the time period, which is the 1920s by now, well, they wanted you to know when it was their money. This was more of an informal entrance for the family. They had a nice set of patio furniture out there in the courtyard, so it would be very enjoyable when they were sitting outside. I'm going to slide right over here. They wanted something comfortable. They wanted to enjoy this place. They wanted to have a city home in the country, so they wanted all those fine technologies and things that they could get out of here. And also, throughout the household, we're going to see the resources that the Johnsons used. For example, you'll see finely carved wooden beams throughout, and a majority of them are redwood. They're on that side, if it was a bit hot, and of course add the nice sound of running water, it might cool the air just a little bit and add some humidity. But if it was cool, as is this time of year, now the Johnsons certainly had fireplaces throughout, and you'll see them. Some of them were functional, they did work, and other ones were just decorative, combination throughout the household. But Scotty survives. He goes on, he regains, of course, the ability to walk, and actually resumes a fairly reasonable life. But the problem is the life of a civil engineer or mining engineer is arduous. It's too difficult. And so for those early years, he could not pursue it the way he had hoped to do. And so what he does, goes into the family businesses. And Albert is a smart man. He's very shrewd and very good with handling money. And so that begins to explain how they could have a primary residence in Chicago and, of course, begin to build a castle in the middle of that valley. That money was, of course, something that drew people to Mr. Johnson and the Johnsons. His family raised horses, and he and his brothers were excellent riders. And eventually all those brothers head west because they want to seek their fortune out here. Scotty ends up here in Death Valley. His favorite animals. He's always going to have mules around because they were so efficient working out here in the desert. Now after that, eventually his skills as a cowboy catch the attention of an agent working for that fella. 12 seasons, that was his job, riding with these performers, traveling throughout the world, and having a pretty good time of it. And eventually, at the end of that 12 seasons, Scotty saw a pretty girl. Because he wanted those investors so scared of this valley that they'd turn around and go home and not need to see anything else. Some diesel generators in there, but unfortunately diesel, much louder, noisier, dirtier, all that. So they needed to kind of cover it up. And so that's why the powerhouse was built, to contain all of that kind of pollution from. So we had a lot of German, a lot of European artists who came through to do the ironwork. They did, in most cases, do the ironwork in a shop in Los Angeles. So now here in the lower music room, we're taking a look around for signs of Bessie Johnson. And we'll admire some portraits here. These portraits here are just total strangers. Beautiful copies of masterworks that were sent over from Europe that the designer thought would look good in the household. So that's the reason they're there. No, greater meaning beyond that. And if we're keeping an eye open here for Bessie, no photographs of her. And that was for a very specific reason. Here, a picture of Albert, and of course, his new best friend, Scotty. And from this point forward, Scotty's going to work his way even into the interior of the household. So not only did he have his formal room there, which honestly he never even used, he would just pick up a clean shirt in there. He didn't like sleeping in there, it was too fancy for him. He lived in a small cabin south of the property here, and the point is, the Johnsons paid him to stay down at that cabin. So when they came up in the winter months to visit here, he came up to visit with them as well. So they had a reproducing piano to help create the sounds of someone playing the piano. The little keyboard there against the wall is merely what controls the chimes tower outside. Potentially vaguely related to a swamp cooler with wet burlap and a fan blowing through it, though that's still kind of debated about exactly how they do it. Yes, yeah, connected to the toilet in Scotty's room. So get a little over there. Yeah. Now, of course, any grand house needs a place to feed its guests, but initially this room was not planned to be a dining room. Now, if you admire these beautiful shelves, any guesses what should have been in here? What do you put on a lot of shelves? Books. Books, exactly. A library. And he'd sit there in the corner. And he'd like to tell folks about the dishes, for example. And you'll see there's an example of the dish down there at the end of the table. Pretty nice little kitchen, right? Yeah. They would push the furniture out of the living room and have big tables set out. So that was one way to host a bunch of folks. Well, this kitchen begins to tell us a little bit more about the Johnsons and about the people who helped run their household. This kitchen, by the way, was the private kitchen. You'll see that there's construction, there's tarps, things around it, and that is because we're reconstructing it. Just this year, we finally got the money to do so. So if you come back in a couple years, you'll see a fully reconstructed. When they were here. When they were here, this place would pretty much be closed up. Probably only the housekeeper would get in here to dust occasionally and keep an eye on the place. Just about that. Beyond that, though, if they had a big party coming through, well, that meant that you needed a staff to help adjust to that. So they could have upwards of 16 people running through here. Electric, even though they look like they should have had candles or, big torches attached to them. Here, our fireplace looks like it should have been an open fire with a hearth, but it's just a propane stove. Nothing too much there. Even around the corner there, it looks to be a well for bringing up water. But you don't need a well when you've got a faucet right next to it. Even the freezer they hid behind a beautifully carved wooden cabinet. And Scotty liked that freezer in particular, because he'd bring tourists through here. Running the household, the Johnsons, needed some help around here. And unfortunately, though, working here was not easy. It was a bit challenging. So to learn a bit about the challenges that you had as a staff person out here, well, we're going to go upstairs. So we're going to go around the corner here and up the stairwell. And please hang on to the hand railings as you go. This is your one chance to touch the house. About 6'3", 6'4". So he needs a tall bed. And you can see the bed out here, back in this room, much longer than the one. Now, it would be polite in the 30s to ask him what their sleeping arrangement was. But we can see that there was, of course, 2 options. And Mr. Johnson was always going to be challenged by getting comfortable because of his back and because of asthma and all sorts of things. And beyond that, not only would she be inspired by it, she would actually write sermons. And her sermons played a key role in the working of the household because if you were an employee here, it was a requirement of your service that you attended those Sunday services. They went through a lot of folks even in that way. And they would only cut off during the hottest parts of the year. Now these baskets come from the Shoshone and Paiute groups that are local to the area. And add another 50 other kinds of workers out here, and this was a large population. Almost 100 people just living out here working on building this castle at different times. It varied. You can finally pay for that meal you're having downstairs, and if you want to see the inside of the household, well, you better take a tour. And so in the 30s, Mrs. Johnson wrote the tour, and it talked about this rug and that lamp, and guides would give it as you would see the house.
Dead rope out there.
Movie stars like Betty Davis and Betty Grable. Well, they came through here, and this was a nice place to get away from it all, enjoy the scenery of Death Valley, and of course, get a chance to talk to Scotty. They were working on outside is going to come to a screeching stop. And that meant, to our everlasting sadness, that big cement pit outside, the pool, was never finished. And so it took over 5 more years for the Johnsons to figure out who finally actually owns this land underneath us here. Throughout the grounds that they could stay in later years, those were spaces used by staff or by some of those guests. So there were other rooms in addition to the house proper. Now for all this time, Scotty is basically paid by the Johnsons to kind of be around and keep an eye on the place. And you can see if you take a look to our weather vane, even above us here, Scotty continues to keep an eye on the place. Above us there, he's leading a mule. On the one above us here, he's cooking over a fire. Right next to it is also the hacienda, which was a guest house and kind of space for staff.